Our YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I came across a Reddit post from a couple days back where somebody was discussing Remake Part 2 and the PHS system. Now, the Reddit post is actually more so about the story, what I think is going to happen from like the Calm flashback to like the Midgar Zalem, the Mithril Mine, and stuff like that. Now, we're not here to discuss that aspect because, like, for one, the post is like going like beat by beat on certain stuff to the point that it's probably not going to be accurate, right? Like, the odds of us guessing the story, like what they're actually going to do, is pretty low. But the post itself did inspire me to want to make my own video and kind of discuss how I think they're going to handle the PHS system or like the party system when it comes to Remake Part 2. Now, for one, the person who did make the Reddit post thinks that it's not going to be like an on-the-fly, be able to swap party members like it was in the original game, which I disagree with. For starters, I don't even know if there's going to be an actual PHS system when it comes to Remake Part 2, because the thing with the original game is our group was splitting up, right? And that's why you use the PHS system, the cell phone, to like call the other teammates and you swap out party members. They try to give it like a narrative reason when you first leave Midgar that your group is splitting up, you don't want to travel like in too big of a group, so you take 2 with you with Cloud, and then the other 2 go on ahead to Calm. But we see that when it comes to Remake Part 1, at least at the ending of episode Intergrade, that is not the case anymore. We see that our group is traveling all the way from outside of Midgar, all the way to Calm, together, all 5 of us. So when I see that cutscene, I take that as the group is not splitting up at all within Remake Part 2, unless there's 4 segments of the game where you have to control certain characters, right? That obviously will probably be the case at certain times. But for the most part, when it comes to the next game and beyond, if we have 5 people that are rolling together, then I don't see any reason why you couldn't swap out those characters at any point in time. Again, we're setting aside the segments of the game or story where they might make you control certain characters. So maybe for like a whole chapter, you can only use Barret and Red 13. Obviously, during those segments of the game, you could not swap out party members because your group is separated. But if we're all rolling together, all 5, 6, 7, 8 of us, whatever, I don't see any reason why they would not allow you to swap party members whenever you wanted to. That just doesn't make sense in a modern game. And even in this game, like 20-something years ago, you're able to do that, for the most part. Either be on the world map or the save point, but for the most part, at any point in the game, you can swap party members. Also, when it comes to the next game, we know based on like interviews with some of the devs that they're moving into at least a bigger world and a bigger game, right? Whether or not that means open world, pseudo-open world, large zones, we're moving into a bigger experience than what Remake Part 1 offered. And with that, I would think would offer more fights, more monsters to fight, whereas in Remake Part 1, of course, is very limited. You couldn't super grind until like you beat the game and you had chapter select. That's when you could really max your characters. And also with the next game, we're going to have at least a minimum of 2 more additional characters, with Red 13, who will actually be playable in the next game, and I'm assuming we'd get Yuffie relatively early-ish on into the story. So we're going to have at least 7 different characters, and you got to be able to level up those characters and grind them. And if there's at least like 18 chapters, again, when it comes to Remake Part 2, that's not enough to go around for 7 different characters to level up to a reasonable level. So you got to be able to swap them when you want to, so you can grind them when you want to. Hell, when it came to just Remake Part 1, there's 18 chapters with 4 characters, and that wasn't enough to max your characters. By the end of my first playthrough of Remake, my characters were all roughly in their 30s to 40s, and I had to go through chapter select to get my characters actually to max level 50. And again, that's still not even max characters, because you got to go through like hard mode to get your manuscripts to actually max your characters. And then if you factor in the possibility of Part 2 going up as far as like Nibelheim and beyond, then you got to think about the character of Cait Sith. That character needs to be able to level up itself and its weapons and progress its weapon cores and stuff. Assuming that Part 2 plays similarly to Part 1 in terms of like character progression. And if we go beyond Nibelheim, then you got to factor in Vincent. If we go even further than that, you got to factor in Cid. And we have the whole party, and everybody needs to be able to level up. So if that is the case, if we have upwards of like, almost the entire FF7 party when it comes to the next game, you have to be able to swap characters if they can level. And this is just my own personal interpretation whenever I play through Remake, but whenever we're actually in Hojo's lab in the Shinder building in the drum, we use the PHS system to swap between different parties, right? But when you look at that, the machines that we're using, it's very archaic, right? It almost looks like a payphone. It's like gigantic machines that you have to like push a button just to talk to somebody that's a couple of feet away from you. To me, when I look at that segment of the game, though we're using it for a narrative perspective, I look at it almost like scoring somewhat poking fun at the old PHS system, because those machines are called the PHS system. And like them poking fun at that because there should be no reason we have to call and contact members of our party just to swap out party members, because we should all be traveling together anyways, which is why I think they show in the group traveling together at the end of episode Intergrade. And if we use the original Final Fantasy VII as a bit of a reference point for Part 2, because it's kind of really all we can go off of right now, unless I'm misremembering, there's not really a point where like anybody's forced out of the party outside of like the end of Disc 1 where like Aerith leaves and goes to the City Ancients by herself, right? There might be like small moments here and there that I'm not thinking of. Like, obviously whenever like you go on like the date in the Gold Saucer, it's just you and the person you're going on the date with, right? But outside of stuff like that, for the most part, the group is traveling together. So there'd be no reason, unless they just change things drastically, with like there's a whole new story beats where people are broken apart. Half the group's over here, half the group's over there. There's no reason why a group should ever be broken up. And again, my main point with this video, in terms of the PHS system and the party system, if our group is always traveling together, there should be no real reason why we can't just swap whenever we want to. But of course, my dudes, this is just a discussion. I want to hear your thoughts as well. When it comes to Remake Part 2, we're leaving Midgard. There's 5 of us, right? Barret, Tifa, Cloud, Aerith, Red 13. If we're all 5 rolling together, how are they going to handle like combat and the party system? Do you think we're going to be able to switch whenever we want to, or do you think the entire game they're going to force 3 characters at a time? I just don't think it's like reasonable to think that going forward, Part 2, Part 3, however many parts there's going to be, that Square Enix is only ever going to let you use the characters they want you to use for that segment of the story. I just think that's ridiculous. Either way, dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't able to do more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, _YT. I'm a Discord. The links to most networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.